الله إن الله بصير بالعباد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي والحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه المنتجبين وعلى جميع عباده الصالحين. السلام عليك سيدي ومولاي يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك منا سيدي سلام الله أبدا ما بقينا وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد منا لزيارتكم والسير على نهجكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. His Eminence Sayyid Mohamed Al-Musawi Hafidhahullah. Respected sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shaheed Dr. Ali Shariati has a very moving prayer which he crafted from within the virtue of courage in his life biography. He said, Allahumma علمني كيف أحيا أما كيف أموت فأعرف. O God, teach me how to live. As for how I will die, I know. The most challenging battlefield in life is not dying on the battlefield. This is the outcome of a long struggle. The real battlefield in life is the art of living. When you reflect on the virtue of courage, as we've been exploring since the beginning of our discussion on the first night of my presentation, you will notice that what human society needs today is going back to basics. Even recently, NESA, in the educational sector here in Australia, even the Department of Education launched a new program known as Back to Basics, which goes to show you that despite all the advancement humankind achieved in the past couple of decades, we are beginning to realize that there is a need to return to the basics, whether it's culturally, educationally, ethically, and spiritually. One of the basics of living is the virtue of courage. And in the past few nights, Dr. Hassan Lami and I have been sharing with you some statistics and figures about the problems of our society, as we emphasized not to dramatize or not to exaggerate certain issues we are facing, but rather to test our discourse, to test our institutions, to test our responsibility within our own communities. I'll give you an example of why this is important. Last year in Muharram, I recall, I addressed the topic of deep human connection. And I mentioned in the introduction of my speech something that I revisited tonight just to see if things have changed. And that is, when you go to Google online, in Google search engine, you type 3 words, fee of being, and the Google search engine will give you multiple options as an autocomplete. So fee of being, the first option in the autocomplete is fee of being alone. Which goes to show you that most people today, and by the way, when we speak about Google search engine, it's a new source of data. You want to know what people are searching today and what they're asking, what kind of concerns they have. One possible source of knowing about the anxieties of our society is the Google search engine. It's an algorithm that helps us track and see the recurring and the frequent searches and themes that people, generally speaking in today's world, are concerned about. Fear of being alone, first option. This was last year. I typed it in tonight and it gave me the same result. We mentioned in the past few nights statistics and figures about bullying. The question is, if we make it to next Muharram, what is the plan? What is the vision? What is the action plan? What is the mission? If loneliness today is one of the issues we are facing in society, how does the legacy of Ashura, I don't want to say provide us with solutions, because this is our responsibility to find the practical and concrete solutions. The legacy of Ashura empowers us and inspires us to find the right solutions. And I'll give you a quick example of what I mean through the experience and the courage of Al-Hur bin Yazid al-Riyahi. And when you study the character of Al-Hur, it's a very existential and rich character. Although the choice which changed the fate of Al-Hur in history could have happened in a moment, blink of an eye. But if you think about the deep choice he made in this blink of an eye, it's like an ocean of insight. Every time you look into it, you discover a new meaning. Al-Hur bin Yazid al-Riyahi, he teaches us reflection, how to stop and think. When we say fear of being alone as an issue, as a challenge, people are afraid of being alone today. Why? Because they are so attached to things that perhaps they assume would bring them joy and happiness, which could partially be the case, but deep down we have higher longings and higher feelings. George Orwell, the English author, in 1946, he published an editorial in this say try to predict how if you need to create artificial violence gives a sense of pleasure that not last long. He mentions a beautiful poetic reflection in the essay. He says, the lights never go out, and the music will always be played, lest we should not see where we are, lost in a haunted wood, children afraid of the dark, who have never been happy or good. George Orwell was basically predicting the problems of our society today. You see people always busy and preoccupied and cannot stand a moment of reflection. That's why when you say to them, what do you do in your free time? They say to you, I'm either playing a game, I'm doing sport, which by the way, there's nothing wrong with these things. These are all important life activities for our emotional hygiene. But I want to get to the point of fear of being alone and lack of reflection and preoccupation and attachment to these things. Playing a game, you know, even reading a book. It's not like we should be reading 24/7. Sometimes we have to stop and reflect. Or chatting, or using social media, and so on and so forth. So basically they cannot live and sit without doing anything and just reflecting. George Orwell says, this disquieting anxiety we are facing is very telling. It goes to show you how it's important to seriously reflect on what kind of needs we have to pay attention to in our lives. Let me move into the heart of the topic for tonight. As I promised you, I will speak about the 4 parts of courage and heroic act which Philippe Zimbardo mentioned, and connect it to the legacy of Ashura and to our contemporary issues. Before I do so, let me share with you a story which took place 800 years after the Buddha in ancient India. There was a saint by the name of Asanga. The saint Asanga, who was a spiritual master, who carried the wisdom of the Buddhist school of thought. Saint Asanga, at one point in his life, he was a young man full of energy. He wanted to change the world. He wanted to spread good and virtue. But he realized that people talk about good all the time without acting on it for some time. And so he decided to retreat into a cave in hope that the Materia, who is the future Buddha, would appear to him and give him the inspiration to transform the whole world. So Asanga went into retreat to recite the mantra of the Materia. After 3 years of practice and meditation, he gained nothing. And he felt discouraged. He lost the courage. He was losing hope in changing society, losing hope in even seeing the value of what he can do to heal the wounds of society. So he walked away from the cave. He stepped out. As he was leaving the cave, he saw a bird flying out of a rock. Taking a closer look at the bird flying out, he realized that the place where the bird passed time and time was smooth. Its feathers, with time, smoothened the rock, and it created a mark in the rock. He was reminded that with perseverance, we can create some change. In other words, we need time. He understood that I have to be patient and return. So he returned to the cave for another 3 years of meditation and practice and reflection. After another 3 years, again, no revelation. He was being discouraged. He was losing hope. He stepped out of the cave. A few steps, moving forward, he saw drops of water falling to the ground, which after centuries of falling in the same spot, had worn the rock, forming a pool. Forming a pool. Again, he was reminded that I have to be patient and return. That's another lesson. He returned to the cave for another 3 years. So that's 3 years already gone. Another 3 years of reflection and meditation. By the way, when you reflect on these people, especially in ancient India, and as you know, even neuroscientists today who are studying the brains and the minds of the Buddhist monks show us how mindfulness can incredibly change our mind in ways that we would never imagine. Different topic, perhaps one day we can talk about it. Patience with suffering, patience for change, patience for the right time. After 3 years, again, in addition to the 6 years, nothing. No outcome, no revelation, no materia. And by the way, this could be testing your patience as audience, just like Saint Asanga is being tested. He leaves the cave and his discourage is becoming worse and miserable. He leaves the cave and he finds an old man sitting on the side of the mountain, rubbing small metal wires with a cloth. Asanga thought that this man had lost all meaning in life and had no hope in doing anything except for using these metal wires and rubbing them with a cloth. So he thought, perhaps this man has lost hope like me in society, and he retreated in seeing and taking joy in the simplest things of life. So Asanga wanted to know what this man was actually doing. What was his purpose? He found out that there was a reason behind it. The old man told him that I was making needles. And he proved it to him. He showed him a box full of his product. Again, Asanga understood the lesson. I have to be patient like this man. Then he returned. Another 3 years after meditation, in total 12 years. Hopeless, he left the entire cave, the entire mountain, and he returned to the village. As he was walking on the outskirts of the village, after a few days of travel, he found a dog in a miserable condition. A very old dog barked as Asanga passed by him. He turned his head to see that dog and its misery. The dog was covered in sores and infected skin on which worms had begun to feed. At the sight of this scene, Asanga was loaded with compassion towards this animal. His heart was overwhelmed with compassion, with the desire to help the dog without harming the worms. He cut a piece of his own flesh, and after cutting it, he placed it where the worms were on the skin of the dog. And he tried to remove them, not with his fingers so he does not harm the worms, but rather with his tongue. As he was trying to avoid the disgust of releasing his tongue to remove them, all of a sudden he discovered dirt as opposed to worms. And the dog disappeared. The materia appeared. Asanga was shocked. He said to him, "Oh master, where have you been? I've been meditating 12 years in the cave waiting for you, why were you not answering my prayers? He said to him, I was with you all the time. When I showed you how the bird flying out of the rock created this mark to teach you that to be on the path of social change, you have to be patient. I was with you when I showed you the old man and his patience and perseverance. And I only appeared to you when you realized that the true path of salvation is not personal salvation. It's freeing yourself from the cave and returning to your village. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam taught us the virtue of courage at the first level of an heroic action, according to Philippe Zimbardo, which is, it's performed in service of others in need, whether that's a person, a group, or a community, in defense of certain ideals. How do we know a heroic action? That's the first standard. Imam Hussein alayhi salam migrated from Medina, leaving his homeland. If you think about it, our parents migrated from Iraq, from Lebanon, from Afghanistan, from other parts of the world to come to Australia, for example, embodying Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. They were embodying the need to make things better. If it wasn't for their migration, if it wasn't for their virtue of courage, we today as educated young people would not have been able to sit on this chair and speak about all these theories in light of the legacy of Ashura. Possibly we could not have had the opportunity to go to university. You know, one of the great examples in my personal life of courage is my mother. She did not attain any academic achievement in her life. She has no university degree as I do. She's not a doctor, she's not a professor, but she has critical awareness. She is like a shepherd. She is a caretaker. She was the drive behind creating a university of knowledge, just like any other mother. I remember when I was in Lebanon studying Arabic and Islamic studies in private schools. As you know, the infrastructure in Lebanon is very poor. So in winter, during school time, the season, we would return home living in a unit in Beirut, and the electricity would go out. And as you know, the educational system in Lebanon is much stricter than Australia, relatively speaking. Now, this could have changed, but I'm just speaking from that experience back then. You know what my mother would do? She would lighten a candle and stay up with us till we finish our homework. And then she would go to sleep. She was reminding us without giving a speech like me. You know, unfortunately, we're poor people. We sit here and we have to prove to society and people that this is enlightenment and that this is the path of salvation, when our parents embody this without even uttering a word, in hope that perhaps we can express some gratitude and appreciation. She was teaching us a lesson by lighting up this candle so that we do our homework. Always approach knowledge as lighting a candle in order to enlighten the darkness and not to curse the darkness. Our responsibility is not to curse the darkness. Our responsibility is to lighten a candle, even if it was one candle. That's the first attribute of being a heroic and courageous person. that you serve a bigger cause. Imam Hussein alayhi salam left Medina. إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي صلى الله عليه وآله. Al-Ummah in the Arabic language is a community. Al-Ummah comes from the same etymological word as Al-Um. Al-Um, the mother, does not differentiate between her children. She expresses the same degree of compassion and love to all her children. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam wanted to revive these values in the Ummah. He wanted to make the Ummah a true Ummah. Because if the Ummah becomes a true Ummah, it would take care of each and every person living under its wing and under its umbrella. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein had to migrate to teach us this lesson. That sometimes you have to be willing to detach yourself from your homeland, to detach yourself from your comfort zone and reach out to those in need. Let's take the example of bullying, because I mentioned bullying. If we address our students today and we say to them, for you to be on the path of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, you don't have to do extraordinary action. You don't have to go to a battlefield and die. As I said earlier, it's about the art of living, how you live. كل يوم عاشوراء وكل أرض كربلاء. How do you live on an everyday basis? You don't have to be a superman to be on the path of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. You can be like a mother who lightens up a candle. How would you respond to Imam Hussein's call, ألا من ناصر ينصرني, in the context of bullying at schools? It's as simple as enacting the same decision to migrate from Medina, but in your context, you would be willing to migrate and leave your circle of friends who do bullying to other innocent people at school. You would point to the elephant in the room. Everybody sees the obvious elephant, but no one pinpoints to the elephant and says, this is oppression, this is injustice. As students today, we have access to clean water. But why do people living in certain regions of India and Latin America, including Africa, do not have the same access to clean water as we do? Are we better than them? The answer is oppression. To be on the path of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam does not necessarily mean that you have to find a solution to these people. Every person can play their role, but at least the bare minimum of your responsibility is to stand up and say, this is oppression. So you migrate, you leave that circle of friends, like Abu Abdullah al-Hussein left Medina to embrace the call of the oppressed. The second attribute of courage, you engage in it voluntarily, and not because you have to do it and you are forced to do it. You engage in it out of free choice. Are you willing to make this free choice in your life? Or are you waiting for someone to instruct you and tell you do this or don't do that? Most of the people who were on the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam made original choices. And as His Eminence Sayyid Muhammad before me mentioned, the Imam gave his companions the night before the day of Ashura the freedom to leave, but they made that genuine choice to be with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. And that is one of the attributes of being courageous. You know what this means in our context today? It means that every day you have to have what we call in psychology today intentional action. You can't sit back and wait to perhaps have someone motivate you to do good. Obviously this is good, but there is an important principle that we learn from Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, and that is to take initiative. When you see that there is a need for society to call on you and use your strengths, whether it's your voice, whether it's your knowledge, whether it's your time, whether it's your physique, whether it's your friendship, your network of relations, then you make this decision and you don't wait for people to call on you. You do it. You go out. You reach out. William James, one of the great founders of psychology of religion, in 1890 he published an important book titled Habit. I recommend you to read this book if you can find it. William James in this book says that no matter how full your bag of virtue may be, and no matter how great and noble your feelings and your sentiments are, if you don't take advantage of taking the most insignificant opportunity in your everyday life to act, you will never be able to build real character strength in your life. You will never be able to build real character strength in your life. And he says, take the example of someone who does every day or two an act, a good habit, for no reason other than that he would rather not do it. So let's say, for example, you're not used to sitting down with your father and actually learning from your father and listening to your father. William James says, for you to develop the virtue of courage, you can't just have a pipe dream and say, yes, I'm going to become courageous tomorrow. You got to start with the little steps. And these little steps are provided every day as opportunities. But you create these opportunities. They're not given. You create them. You make them. You make the time for them. So he says, you got to do these little things for no reason other than you would rather not do it. Why? Because when a catastrophe or a challenge comes by, you will not be as unnerved. You will withstand the test. You will succeed in the test. I'll give you an example from modern day society, how this principle functions. You know, we pay for insurance, premiums for fire insurance, for example. When you pay for fire insurance, you are not paying for something that's going to happen now as a backup. And you hope that fire would not happen. But you are paying the premium or the premiums so that when the catastrophe happens, all the payments you've made will prevent the ruin and the harm from reaching you. I want you to reflect on this very good example. So all the payments you've made were necessary for you to prevent the harm if it takes place. If fire takes place and you have no insurance, you're going to pay the cost. You're going to pay the price. But if you had been paying consistently your premiums, if the fire does occur, you will be protected from the catastrophe. The same can be said to building character in your everyday life. If on a daily basis you try to action these little opportunities in your life, when a catastrophe, when a real challenge comes, what happens is, William James uses this beautiful expression, you become like a tower that stands when everything around it rocks. Like a tower. Everything around it rocks, but it stands. It doesn't move. Perhaps this could provide us with one insight into why some people failed on the day of Ashura to join the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The question is, what was the art of their life? How were they living on a daily basis? The third characteristics characteristic of courage is performing it with the recognition of possible risks and costs, be that related to your physical health or personal reputation, in which the actor is willing to accept anticipated sacrifice. And the final attribute, you perform this action without external gain at the time of the act. You think Imam Hussein alayhi salam was expecting change at the time of his sacrifice? The change actually came after. Sometimes we get frustrated when we don't see the results of our struggles and actions, but it's because we don't have the art of living. As a matter of fact, you don't need to see the outcomes. All you need to do is plant the seeds, and one day the seeds will turn into plants, and in hope they will turn into trees, in the shade of which other people whom you will not see will come and sit in the shade. My conclusion is as follows. Inshallah, I'll finish in 2 minutes. And this is the virtue of courage. 3 minutes. I want each and every one of you, in your own time, to reflect on the following. What is your secure base in life? Psychologists say that people who are resilient and have courage have what they call a secure base. Musa alayhi salam in the Quran had a secure base. You know what that secure base was? His stick. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the first mentor. He's the first coach. When Musa saw the fire and he was rushing to bring some light to his people in hope that he will bring them, change, Allah said to him, Ya Musa, ikhla'na alayk innaka fil wadi al-muqaddasi tuwa. Till Allah says, Ma tilka biyaminika ya Musa. By the way, Musa, what's this in your right hand? قال هي عصاي أتوكأ عليها وأهش بها على غنمي ولي فيها مآرب أخرى. This is my stick, I'm a shepherd. I lean onto it. And by the way, this is what you need in life. You need something which has meaning. You can lean onto when challenges come in your way. When fees come in your way, when you are tested, you can lean on that secure base. هي عصاي أتوكأ عليها وأهش بها على غنمي. And I use it when I'm taking care of my flock. ولي بها أو ولي فيها مآرب أخرى. And I use it for other purposes. Do you think that's the end of the story? This simple stick has a long-term effect. قال ألقها يا موسى. O Musa, throw it to the ground. فألقاها فإذا هي حية تسعى. As soon as he dropped it, it transformed into a snake. You know, the stick of Musa alayhi salam was the stick he used to face the propaganda of the Pharaoh. What is your stick in life? It could be a pen. It could be a soccer ball. You could use sportsmanship, if you were good at soccer, in order to live that legacy of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. To accept defeat with honor and love and respect, and not to be a sore loser. It could be a book. It could be a bag. What is your secure base? It could be a close friend whom you look up to, a role model, your parent. More than that, the stick of Musa alayhi salam not only defeated the magicians and their propaganda, it split the Red Sea and it empowered the people of Israel to make the transition into a new society. But remember, the stick of Musa alayhi salam is the stick of mercy. He was a shepherd. We are all shepherds, and we are responsible for our flock. Past the seeker as he prayed, came the sick, the hungry, the poor, and tired and forsaken, and in anguish the seeker cried out, "O dear God, how can you look upon such misery and not do something?" And deep down in the depth of his soul, the seeker, like Musa, you, heard a voice from God. I did something. I made you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.